The vault opens. The men were coming. Fast. Relentless. And after 20 years of hiding, Amelia finally understood one terrifying truth. She had never escaped them. Not really. They had simply been waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to reveal herself, waiting for the missing heir to step back into the light. And now that she had, the hunt was over. The war had begun. Walter Graves rushed toward the apartment door. His face had turned ghostly pale. The confidence of a seasoned lawyer was gone. In its place stood an old man carrying decades of fear. He peeked through the hallway camera, then immediately stepped back. His hands were shaking. They found us. Amelia felt her stomach tighten. Who are they? Walter looked at her, not as a lawyer, not as an advisor, but as someone who had spent 20 years protecting a secret. The people who stole your future. The words landed heavily. Outside, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Closer, closer, closer. Walter moved quickly. He grabbed the sealed envelope from the table and shoved it into Amelia's hands. Whatever happens. His voice cracked. Protect this. The pounding on the apartment door began. Violent, aggressive, not the knock of visitors, the knock of people who already believed they owned everything. The door shook again, and again, and again. Walter looked toward the fire escape. There isn't much time. Amelia's mind raced. Questions filled her head, but one question mattered most. What's inside the envelope? Walter's expression changed. For a moment, something resembling hope appeared in his eyes. The location. The location of what? Walter took a slow breath, then spoke the words that had haunted generations. The Ashford Vault. Silence. Even the pounding seemed to disappear. The Ashford Vault. For years, Amelia believed it was a myth, a story, a family legend, something whispered about but never proven. Walter shook his head. It exists. And your grandfather built it himself. Another crash hit the door. Wood splintered. The men outside were getting through. Walter spoke faster. The fortune was never lost. Amelia froze. What? The world believes the wealth disappeared. It didn't. The money was moved. The evidence was moved. The truth was moved. His eyes locked onto hers. Everything is inside the vault. The doorframe cracked. Walter grabbed Amelia's shoulder. You have to leave. But you... Go! The door exploded inward. The men stormed inside, and Amelia ran. Minutes later, she disappeared into the maze of city streets. Rain poured from dark clouds overhead. Her heart pounded. The envelope remained clenched tightly in her hand. Everything had changed. The vault was real. The fortune was real. And somewhere inside that vault was the truth behind 20 years of lies. 3 days later, Amelia stood before a mountain, far from the city, far from the headlines, far from Ethan Blackwell. The location inside the envelope had led her here, an abandoned private estate hidden deep within a remote valley. Nature had nearly swallowed the property whole. Vines covered the walls. Trees surrounded the grounds. Time had erased almost every sign of its existence. Almost, because beneath the ruins stood something impossible, a steel structure embedded directly into the mountain itself. Massive, silent, unmovable. The vault. Amelia stared, speechless. Walter had been telling the truth. The Ashford Vault existed, and now she stood before it. A cold wind swept across the valley. The giant steel door remained motionless. No keypad, no visible lock, no handle, no instructions, nothing. Then she remembered the envelope. Inside was a second item, a small silver key, the same crest engraved on its surface, the Ashford crest. With trembling hands, Amelia approached the door. At its center sat a hidden keyhole, almost invisible, waiting. For 20 years, it had waited. For one person, one heir, one name. Amelia inserted the key. Nothing happened. For a moment. Then, a deep mechanical sound echoed through the mountain. The ground vibrated. Ancient gears awakened. Massive locking mechanisms shifted. Steel groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. And slowly, the vault began to open. After 2 decades of silence, the Ashford vault had finally awakened. Inside was darkness, endless darkness. Amelia stepped forward carefully. Lights suddenly flickered to life, one after another. Rows of illumination stretched into the distance, and what she saw next nearly stopped her heart. Gold, rows upon rows of gold, precious metals, rare artifacts, investment certificates, ownership documents, international account records, historical treasures, assets beyond imagination. The hidden fortune, the lost wealth the world believed had vanished. It was all here. Billions, perhaps more. The Ashford empire had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the rightful heir. Amelia stood frozen. The sheer scale was overwhelming, but then she noticed something strange. The fortune wasn't the center of the room. A single chair sat beneath a spotlight, facing a large screen, almost like someone had prepared a message. Prepared it years ago. Prepared it specifically for her. With cautious steps, Amelia approached. The moment she sat down, the screen activated. Static filled the room. Then a face appeared. Amelia gasped. Her grandfather, Richard Ashford, alive, or at least recorded. The most powerful magnate of his generation looked directly into the camera, directly into her eyes, as if he knew this moment would come, as if he knew she would survive, as if he knew she would find him. His voice filled the vault. "To my granddaughter." Tears immediately filled Amelia's eyes, because she had never heard his voice before. Not like this, not clearly, not directly. The recording continued. "If you are watching this, it means I was right." The old magnate sighed heavily. There was a traitor. Amelia's pulse quickened. Every question she had ever asked suddenly felt close to an answer. Richard leaned forward. "The danger never came from outside our family. It came from within." The room felt colder, much colder, and then came the first bombshell, the first revelation, the first truth, the one that changed everything. "My death was not an accident." Amelia stopped breathing. The words echoed through the vault. Again, and again, and again. Not an accident. The plane crash had been murder. The entire world had been lied to. The recording continued. "I discovered the conspiracy too late. I discovered who was stealing from us. I discovered who intended to take control of everything." His expression darkened. "The person responsible shared our blood." Family betrayal. Walter had been right. The enemy had always been inside. Richard continued speaking, and with every sentence, the mystery unraveled further. Secret bank transfers, forged documents, bribed officials, corrupt executives, decades of deception. The evidence was overwhelming. Every accusation supported, every claim documented, every crime recorded. And then Amelia realized something. The vault wasn't protecting money. The vault was protecting proof. Proof powerful enough to destroy empires. Proof powerful enough to send people to prison. Proof powerful enough to expose the traitor forever. Suddenly, another screen activated, then another, then another. Hundreds of digital files appeared. Video recordings, audio recordings, photographs, contracts, bank records. Everything, every secret, every betrayal, every lie. Richard Ashford had documented everything before his death, and he had hidden it where nobody could reach it. Until now, Amelia stared at the evidence, overwhelmed, shocked, speechless. But the biggest revelation had yet to come. Richard's face returned to the screen. His eyes seemed almost haunted. "As for the person who betrayed us," he paused for several seconds, long enough to make Amelia's heart pound. Then he spoke a name, one single name, and the moment Amelia heard it, the world seemed to stop, because she knew that name. She knew it very well. The person wasn't dead. The person wasn't missing. The person wasn't hiding. The person was still powerful, still influential, still respected, still operating in plain sight. The realization hit like lightning. And at that exact moment, miles away in a corporate boardroom, Ethan Blackwell received an emergency call. The voice on the other end sounded terrified. They opened it. Ethan stood immediately, his face drained of color. What? The vault. Silence. The caller swallowed. The Ashford vault has been opened. For several seconds, nobody spoke, because everyone in that room understood what it meant. The evidence was no longer hidden. The fortune was no longer lost. The heir was no longer missing, and the truth was no longer buried. The game had changed, forever, and somewhere inside that mountain vault, Amelia finally understood why so many people wanted her dead, because she wasn't just the heir. She was the key to exposing one of the greatest betrayals in modern history. The family traitor. Some truths change your future. Others destroy your past. As Amelia stood inside the Ashford vault, staring at the screen before her, she realized she had just discovered the second kind. The name echoed through her mind. Again, and again, and again. She wanted to believe she had heard it wrong. She wanted to believe the recording was corrupted, that the evidence was incomplete, that her grandfather had made a mistake. But deep inside, she already knew the truth. The traitor had never been a stranger. The traitor had never been an outsider. The traitor had been family. For 20 years, Amelia had imagined the enemy as some shadowy businessman, a greedy investor, a corrupt politician, a ruthless competitor, someone distant, someone unknown. The reality was far worse, because betrayal hurts most when it comes from the people who know exactly where to place the knife. The screen flickered. Richard Ashford's face returned, older, tired, haunted, the expression of a man who had discovered something he wished he never had. If you are watching this. His voice echoed through the vault. It means my worst fears came true. Amelia sat motionless. Every nerve in her body felt alive. The person responsible for our destruction was trusted. Richard paused. Pain crossed his face. I loved that person. Another pause. And that was my greatest mistake. Amelia swallowed hard. The room felt colder with every word. The recording shifted to another file. A younger Richard appeared. This time, he wasn't alone. He was sitting across a conference table. Several executives surrounded him. Lawyers, board members, family representatives, and one familiar face, the traitor. The footage was grainy, but the tension was obvious. Richard spoke calmly. The other person smiled, yet something about that smile felt wrong. Calculated, artificial, dangerous. As the recordings continued, a horrifying picture emerged. The betrayal hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years. Years of planning. Years of manipulation. Years of deception. The traitor had slowly positioned themselves closer and closer to power. Closer and closer to the fortune. Closer and closer to complete control. Every decision, every investment, every family dispute, every legal challenge, all of it had been orchestrated, not for wealth alone, but for ownership, control, dominance, the destruction of anyone standing in the way, including Amelia, including her parents, including Richard Ashford himself. The recordings showed everything. Secret meetings, hidden transactions, private conversations, recorded phone calls. The evidence was overwhelming. No courtroom could ignore it. No lawyer could explain it away. No amount of money could bury it. For 2 decades, the traitor had built an empire upon lies, and now those lies were collapsing. File after file exposed the truth, until finally, Amelia found the recording that shattered her heart. A home video, simple, personal, family footage, the kind people record without thinking, the kind meant to preserve happy memories. In the video, Amelia appeared as a little girl, laughing, running through a garden, her parents smiling nearby. Everything seemed perfect, until another figure entered the frame, the traitor, standing beside her family, laughing with them, celebrating with them, holding her when she was a child. Amelia's chest tightened, because this wasn't just family. This was someone she had trusted, someone who had watched her grow up, someone who had looked her parents in the eye while secretly plotting their downfall. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from fear, not from anger, from heartbreak. The deepest betrayals aren't committed by enemies. They're committed by people who once called you family. Hours passed inside the vault. The more Amelia learned, the more horrifying the truth became. The conspiracy reached farther than she imagined. Bankers, judges, corporate executives, politicians. Entire careers had been bought. Entire investigations had been silenced. People had disappeared. Evidence had vanished. Witnesses had changed their stories. And behind it all stood one person, pulling every string, directing every move, waiting patiently for the Ashford fortune to become theirs. Then Amelia discovered something unexpected. A recent file, not 20 years old, not 15, not 10, recent, very recent. Her pulse quickened. Someone had been updating the vault's evidence system. Someone had continued gathering information long after Richard Ashford's death. The file opened. A familiar face appeared. Walter Graves. Amelia froze. Walter sat before a camera, exhausted, older, yet determined. The recording had been made only 6 months earlier. "If you're seeing this," Walter said quietly, "then I probably failed to protect you." Amelia's eyes widened. The old lawyer knew. He knew danger was coming. He knew she would eventually find the vault, and he knew he might not survive long enough to explain everything. Walter continued, "The traitor knows you're alive." The words struck like lightning. Amelia sat upright. Every instinct screamed. Walter looked directly into the camera. "They've known for months." Fear gripped her. Months? Not days. Not weeks. Months. The hunt hadn't begun after the gala. It had started long before. The surveillance, the anonymous letters, the phone calls, the strangers watching her apartment. None of it was random. Someone had been preparing for her return, and that someone was already moving. Then came the final warning. "The traitor is closer than you think." The recording ended. Silence filled the vault. Amelia stared at the screen. Closer than you think. What did that mean? Who else knew? Who else had been involved? Suddenly her phone vibrated. The sound nearly made her jump. No signal should have existed inside the vault. Yet somehow, a message had arrived. Unknown number. Only 3 words. "I know everything." Amelia's blood ran cold. A second message appeared. "Leave the vault." Then another. "Now." Her heart pounded. Someone knew exactly where she was. Someone was watching. Somehow, immediately, Amelia moved toward the security monitors. Several external cameras surrounded the mountain property. She activated the feed and froze. Vehicles, dozens of them, black SUVs, approaching from multiple directions. The mountain was surrounded. The vault had become a trap. The traitor had finally made their move. Meanwhile, across the country, Ethan Blackwell was making discoveries of his own. His investigation into the Ashford fortune had exposed connections he never expected. Connections involving his own company, his own investors, even his own father. The realization left him stunned. The Ashford conspiracy wasn't separate from his life. It was connected to it. Deeply connected. Dangerously connected. And for the first time, Ethan began asking a question he never imagined possible. What if his family had benefited from the Ashfords' destruction? The thought disturbed him, because suddenly, his role in this story felt very different. He wasn't just chasing a mystery anymore. He might be part of it. Back at the mountain, the first confrontation began. Amelia activated the vault's security systems. Steel doors locked automatically. Surveillance cameras rotated into position. Hidden barriers emerged from the walls. Richard Ashford had planned for this possibility. He knew someone might come. He knew the traitor would eventually try to reclaim the evidence, and he had prepared accordingly. Outside, the vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Men stepped out, armed, organized, professional, not thieves, not random criminals. These people had a mission, and they were willing to do anything to complete it. Then, one final vehicle arrived. A black luxury sedan, more expensive than all the others combined. The rear door opened slowly. A figure stepped out. Calm, confident, unafraid. The person removed their sunglasses and looked directly toward the vault entrance, toward Amelia, toward the inheritance, toward 20 years of secrets. Amelia zoomed the camera closer, then closer still. The image sharpened, and the moment she saw the face, her entire world stopped, because standing outside the vault was the very person named in her grandfather's recording. The traitor, the architect of her family's destruction, the person who stole 20 years of her life. And now, after decades of hiding behind lies, they had finally come to collect what they believed belonged to them. The confrontation Amelia had waited her entire life for was about to begin, and before it ended, one of them would lose everything. The twist nobody saw coming. The truth had finally caught up with everyone. For 20 years, powerful people had hidden behind lies. For 20 years, fortunes had been stolen. For 20 years, a family had been destroyed. And now, standing inside the Ashford vault, Amelia Carter was moments away from ending it all. Outside, the mountain echoed with tension. Security alarms blared. The vault remained sealed. The traitor stood beyond the steel doors, waiting, watching, believing victory was finally within reach. But neither Amelia nor the traitor understood one critical fact. The biggest secret inside the vault had not yet been revealed, and it would change everything. Hours earlier, Ethan Blackwell had rushed toward the mountain after uncovering a shocking connection between the Ashford conspiracy and his own family. The discovery had shaken him, not because it threatened his wealth, not because it threatened his reputation, but because it threatened everything he believed about his father. Growing up, Ethan had viewed his father as a brilliant businessman, a visionary, a self-made success story. Now the evidence suggested something very different. A man who may have built portions of his empire on stolen foundations. A man connected to people who profited from the Ashford collapse. A man who knew far more than he ever admitted. The realization haunted Ethan during the entire drive. Because if the evidence was true, his family had not merely witnessed the crime, they had benefited from it. Inside the vault, Amelia reviewed the final files left by Richard Ashford. Thousands of pages, hundreds of recordings, decades of secrets, and buried among them was one final folder, locked, encrypted, labeled with only 3 words. For the heir, her hands trembled. Everything had led to this moment. The hidden fortune, the secret recordings, the betrayal, the missing inheritance, the hunt, the vault, all of it pointed here. Slowly, she opened the file. A new video appeared. Richard Ashford looked older than before, weaker, as though he knew his time was running out. For several seconds, he said nothing. He simply looked into the camera. Then he smiled sadly. "If you've reached this recording." He paused. "It means you've already discovered the traitor." Amelia nodded unconsciously. Yes, she had, or at least she thought she had. Richard continued. "And if you're watching this, then I need to tell you something nobody else knows." The room became perfectly silent. Even the alarms outside seemed distant. Richard took a deep breath, then spoke the words that changed everything. The traitor was never the mastermind. Amelia froze. The world seemed to stop. Not the mastermind? What did that mean? Richard leaned forward. "The person you believe betrayed us was only a pawn." A chill ran through Amelia's body. 20 years of searching, 20 years of pain. And now she was learning there was someone else, someone bigger, someone hidden, someone who had remained invisible all this time. The screen changed. A photograph appeared, then another, documents, bank transfers, private communications, secret meetings, evidence connecting dozens of influential people. And at the center of all of it stood one name, one person, one architect, the true mastermind. Amelia stared, unable to breathe, because the name wasn't the family traitor. It wasn't Walter Graves. It wasn't a politician. It wasn't a corporate rival. It wasn't anyone she expected. The mastermind was Ethan Blackwell's father, Jonathan Blackwell, the man the public called a genius, the man celebrated as a business legend. The man who spent 2 decades hiding in plain sight. Amelia's heart pounded. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing assets, the redirected investments, the corporate acquisitions, the disappearance of evidence, the manipulation of the courts, the creation of entire companies funded by stolen wealth. Jonathan Blackwell had orchestrated it all, not for revenge, not for power alone, but for legacy. He wanted to build an empire that would outlive him, and he had used the Ashford family fortune as the foundation. Outside the vault, another vehicle arrived. Ethan stepped out. Rain poured from the sky. The mountain trembled with thunder. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't arriving as a billionaire. He was arriving as a son seeking the truth. Minutes later, the vault doors opened. Amelia emerged carrying the evidence. The traitor stood waiting. The armed men stood behind them. And now, Ethan stood between both sides. The confrontation everyone feared had finally arrived. The traitor smiled, confident, certain, victorious. Then Amelia spoke. For the first time in years, for the first time since the gala, for the first time since the hunt began, she held up the evidence, and everything changed. The recordings were transmitted, the files uploaded, the documents released, not to one journalist, not to one lawyer, not to one courtroom. To everyone, every major news organization, every financial regulator, every international investigative agency, every media outlet. The truth exploded across the world. Instantly, there was no stopping it, no burying it, no controlling it, no buying silence. The evidence was too overwhelming, too public, too complete. Within hours, arrests began. Executives resigned. Bank accounts froze. Investigations opened. Companies collapsed. Political careers ended. For the first time in 20 years, justice was moving faster than corruption. And at the center of it all stood Jonathan Blackwell, the true mastermind, the man who thought his secrets would die with him, the man who underestimated one thing, the heir. Meanwhile, Ethan stood in stunned silence. Everything he believed about his family's success had been shattered. His empire, his reputation, his wealth, much of it traced back to lies. He looked at Amelia, the woman he humiliated, the woman he mocked, the woman he tried to destroy. And for the first time, he truly understood what he had done. He had mistaken kindness for weakness, humility for insignificance, silence for surrender. He had judged her by her uniform instead of her character, and now the consequences surrounded him. The rain continued falling. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some truths speak for themselves. Months later, the world looked very different. The Ashford inheritance had finally been restored. The legal battles ended. The stolen assets recovered. The fortune returned to its rightful owner. But surprisingly, Amelia didn't move into a palace. She didn't surround herself with luxury. She didn't chase power. Instead, she did something nobody expected. She created foundations, scholarship programs, housing initiatives, medical centers. She used the fortune to rebuild lives instead of control them, the very opposite of what her enemies would have done. And because of that, people remembered her differently, not as the missing heir, not as the billionaire successor, but as the woman who broke a cycle of greed. Walter Graves lived long enough to see justice served, long enough to watch the truth emerge, long enough to keep the promise he made 20 years earlier. And when he finally passed away peacefully, he knew the Ashford story was complete. As for Ethan Blackwell, his future changed forever. Many of his companies survived, some didn't. His reputation suffered, his pride suffered more, but something unexpected happened. He became a different man, a humbler man, a man forced to rebuild his life honestly. For the first time, and perhaps that was its own form of justice. 1 year later, Amelia stood alone inside the vault, one final time. The room was quiet. The fortune remained secure. The evidence had done its job. The war was over. She walked toward the screen where her grandfather's final recording still waited. Richard Ashford smiled from the image. The same gentle smile, the same sadness, the same hope. Amelia smiled back. For years, she chased answers. For years, she chased justice. For years she chased the past. Now she finally understood something important. The greatest inheritance wasn't the money. It wasn't the companies. It wasn't the fortune. It was the truth. The truth gave her back her family. The truth gave her back her name. The truth gave her back her future. And finally, after 20 years of darkness, the Ashford legacy could rest, not because the vault had opened, but because the wounds had finally closed, and somewhere beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal, beyond the fortune and the power, a little girl who lost everything had finally found her way home. The end.